Hello and welcome to Automattic's Noho space. We're so glad that you could be here to join us this evening during Climate Week. Automattic is proud to provide a platform for important ideas and issues that matter, both online and now, tonight, in real life as well. My name is Vanessa Riley Thurman, and I am honored to be introducing these three women this evening who are facing the climate crisis head on and leveraging their unique talents to create change. Also joining us virtually via live stream, we have guests across the world. So hello to you as well, and thank you for joining us. So I would like to first introduce Christina Necco, who is originally from Colombia. Christina founded Hope Hydration, which is a certified B Corp that creates smart water bottle refill stations to reduce plastic waste. Christina is also the head of global partnerships for Support and Feed, where she promotes plant-based nutrition to combat climate change and enhance food equity. I would also like to introduce Whitney McGuire. Whitney is an attorney, the director of sustainability for the Guggenheim Museum, and the co-founder of Sustainable Brooklyn. Sustainable Brooklyn is a community-based consultancy and think tank dedicated to concretizing equity within the sustainability movement. She has a demonstrated track record as a subject matter expert for sustainability. And finally, I'm excited to introduce Ana Teresa Fernández, who is a Mexican-born performance artist and painter and the creator of Under Pressure, the show that we are sharing with you this evening. Throughout her career, Ana Teresa has focused on intersectional socio-political issues, using her art as a vehicle for social change. Outside of her art, Ana Teresa takes an active role in climate justice activism through her partnership with San Francisco-based organizations like Me Water Foundation and Youth versus the Apocalypse, where she provides youth in her area with a connection to the water and a voice to advocate for it. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So, to get us started, each of you works in distinct areas: smart technology, institutional sustainability, and art activism. How do you see the intersections of your fields enhancing the collective impact on climate change?
Can I kick it up? Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for being here. I know there's a lot of places you could be during Climate Week, so it's amazing to see this full room. Yeah, so at Hope Hydration, which is the name of my startup, we create these smart water bottle refill stations, which are essentially a solution for corporations, venues, cities to increase access to water, but also reduce plastic waste. And I think when I was thinking through this question, I was thinking about the importance of all the different stakeholders that we work with. We can create a technological solution, but if a city is not willing to implement it, somebody is not willing to fund it, and there's no awareness around the issue to actually reuse your water bottle, then it's not going to be successful. And so I think just seeing the work that everyone is doing here, whether that's through art and amplification or through the institutions, or just getting together your friends to create a company and a solution, the intersection of everything, I think, is really what allows us to create sustainable change. So I love that question, and I'll turn it to you guys.
Well, I like to call it the triple A effect, because I think that a lot of people tend to minimize art. When I say that I'm an artist, I was just talking to someone about telling them, my husband told his CEO, oh, my wife's an artist. Oh, my kid draws too. And he did a big sigh. He's like, let me tell you something. But nonetheless, one of the things that I think that art has is the ability to create awareness, access, and action, which then leads to agency. And I think it is through agency that a lot of these changes begin to manifest. But without the 3 A's beforehand, I think that there's really like a lack of muscle. And so even being here in New York, so often I'm just not aware that I'm on an island, right? and thinking that there's water all around me. And so in this case, I really wanted to create a tidal pool, like the oceans, which is under pressure. It's a project that's talking about sea level rise and the effects of sea level rise, in which I took the different hues from glaciers melting across the world, and I placed them in different balloons, from which I did a composition through this action of stepping on them. They exploded. I waited 3 weeks for them to dry up. Thus, this performance that has time-based, you talk about the, abstract expressionists, which are mostly male. So for me, it's like giving the middle finger to the mostly male, like expressive, I'm gonna smoke a cigarette and drink beer and drip paint. But in this way, I'm really engaging with the issues of climate and our footprint, literally our blueprint that that's leading through the anthropogenic elements that we're causing how the world is gonna be changing because of us.
3 A's: access, agency, awareness.
Awareness,
Yes.
access,
Access, agency.
action,
Action.
which leads to
Which
agency.
leads to agency.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's 4 A's.
There's 4 A's, and I love that. So at Sustainable Brooklyn, the consultancy that I co-founded, awareness is really at the heart of the work that we do. Really, the ethos is when you know better, you do better. But when we think about how unsustainability is a design flaw and has been designed inequitably for centuries, leading us to this climate crisis, we start to pinpoint leverage points where we can interject education, storytelling, and shift the narrative in ways that create action and agency. And I think that art is at the heart of what we support, and it's at the heart of what I've been focused on my entire life. I was actually raised by an artist. My mother was a single mother and an artist, and so I really have that background and passion for supporting artists and that awareness that art can change the world. And so in my law practice, I have focused on supporting largely Black and brown femme fine artists for 10 years, understanding that if they can understand their contracts or interpret their contracts in a way where they won't need me anymore, that creates agency for them, but also supports this idea that artists have more leverage than in this space and in this conversation and in the future than they really are given credit for. So the work that I do at the Guggenheim really is an aspect of this work and builds upon this foundation of art and sustainability and how all of this can lead to climate justice when the right stakeholders are engaged. So I really think that in terms of the institutions and the institution that I represent, there is a unique opportunity for the bringing together of different communities and the shifting of ideologies and perspectives just from the engagement with art. And it really is up to us to make these spaces more inviting, make them more accessible for communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis. So I really think that that's how, our work or my work really intersects with this and in response to these issues.
Yes, it's fantastic. I have had the pleasure of getting to know these 3 women, and one thing that's been really interesting to learn about is your backgrounds and what brought you into this work. So given your diverse backgrounds, Colombia, Mexico, Dayton, Ohio. I'm also from Ohio. Very exciting. So how do you see culture and identity and heritage playing a role in your work and in the mission that you're trying to accomplish and in the broader movement?
Okay, I can kick it off. I was born in Colombia, and my parents emigrated here when I was 2 years old, following the American dream, escaping at the time what was a lot of violence in Colombia, to really give us an opportunity to have a better education. And so I grew up very bicultural, you know, growing up here, but visiting Colombia a ton and really keeping that cultural identity in our household, speaking in Spanish, all our cultural traditions alive. And during this time, I started witnessing, as a really young child, just intense disparities in the two worlds that I lived. In the United States, I went to this like beautiful, gigantic, clean school. There wasn't trash on the streets. The air wasn't polluted. And then I'd visit Colombia and I'd see somebody my age with a child on the street littered with trash. And I think very young, I started asking, like, why is this happening? Where are all these disparities coming from? Why is the United States like this and Colombia looks like this? And what is my role in that? So I really began to ask these questions as a kid, and began to study this when I went to college. I studied environmental science and international development, and really started learning about all the factors at play in creating these distinct worlds. And so I think that background really inspired me to take action, you know, make a difference, and realize that like we can all be part of the solution. There are so many solutions out there, and we all really do have a role to play in that. So that inspired me to start my company, Hope Hydration. And something that I was just thinking about, we were chatting about earlier, is how these injustices are so visible in the climate crisis, and sometimes also invisible. So all of the trash and the plastic that is created here in New York, as one of the highest polluters of single-use plastic in the world, are actually shipped to Ohio, to Colombia, to Pakistan, for other countries to take care of. We're basically paying to pollute someone else's land and water. And so I think with my background, with my studies, I try and bring this kind of multicultural perspective in questioning who else is being affected. You know, what are the voices that need to be in the room to represent other issues, not just Colombian issues or, you know, issues from Ohio? How are we broadening the scope and of the voices in the room so that we can create more equitable and just solutions? So yeah, I've been very privileged to have been brought up that way, and try and use my place in the world to advocate for other voices and solutions on a global level.
I share a lot of Christina's story. I myself grew up in Mexico, came to the US when I was 11, but I grew up on the coast, the Gulf Coast of Mexico, in Tampico, Tamaulipas, the third most humid city in the world. But every single Sunday, we would go all day long to the beach. And on the way to get to the beach, I knew that we were about 10 minutes away because the stench of the refinery would welcome us into the beach. And so I grew up thinking that all beaches stunk like refineries. And then after we got home, every single Sunday, my mom would like disrobe us, and she would wipe us down with white gasoline because we had petroleum patches stuck on our tushies, stuck on our heels, stuck on our elbows, and it was just religious. I mean, that was the experience that I had. And so I grew up thinking that all beaches had this like petroleum jelly in it. I grew up thinking that all beaches smelled this way. So when we moved to San Diego, California, lo and behold, it was like, you know, blue waters, cold, no petroleum. And it was like, what, like, I didn't know that I had arrived because it was no smell. And I think that there was this, again, the differences, the compare and contrast, having access to both the beautiful beach that's well kept, that's well maintained. But also one of the things that I noticed is that I was one of the few people in the water in Mexico. These beaches were so densely populated, however, everyone remained at the shore. And as I began to do work with water, one of the things that I realized was that only 1 in 3 women know how to swim. Less than 55% of the population can actually swim. So we're thinking about sea level rise and the migration that is due to the dislocation because of sea level rise across shorelines. There is such a correlation for who has access to be able to enjoy, for example, our oceans, our beaches, and understanding that a lot of the illiteracy comes because we're not literate to water. We don't know how to be in water. And we don't know how to enjoy it. We don't know how to relate to it because it's a foreign world. It's a foreign language. And I think that one of the things that I've been trying to do is mitigate and create connections through my work, through these actions that help bridge people and their understanding to water and what that does. Because with that access, with that knowledge, having literacy to being in the ocean creates a relationship with the ocean that makes you want to take care of it. You're not just on a boat, you're not just on the shoreline, but you're actually participating with it and understanding it. It becomes an act of empowerment to be able to actually understand and how to be with and around water.
I love that our experiences and our work are foregrounded by juxtaposition, right? Like juxtaposing experiences. And I really think that in the context of climate awareness and climate justice, this idea of exposure to a whole new world, right? Where San Diego can show you that beaches can be clean, right? For me, it's like, so I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the West Side, near a lot of landfills, which I didn't know were landfills until I was much older. I just thought they were big dirt hills. And in very close proximity to brownfields, which are industrial type buildings that have been neglected irresponsibly, and so the machinery and everything else is just left there to rot. And it wasn't until I turned 13 when I got the opportunity to go to a New England boarding school in Newport, Rhode Island, that I saw the difference between how an environment that I grew up in and an environment that I ended up in for high school can really impact the well-being of people and their environments, and how that really shapes their experiences. So this idea of juxtaposition, I think really we need to hone in on, because our future leaders really are people who are not listened to, right? Our future leaders and people who really can get us out of this are people who may not have access to the resources that many of us in this room have access to. And so it really is our responsibility to pinpoint or identify how we can support communities that have been traditionally omitted from the climate solutioning that's been happening over the past 30 or so years. So that's what Sustainable Brooklyn kind of ended up doing, right? We were responding to this glaring omission in these conversations of people of culture and people who honestly just come from, places like where we're from. And so my background really informs the way that I show up in these spaces. And it really informs the way that I also mentor people who are from where I'm from and bring those along with me, because that's my responsibility.
Amazing. It's been interesting exploring this juxtapositioning with all of you. The idea that the communities most impacted by the climate crisis are not the voices in the room when we're talking about solving it, which is another reason I'm so excited that we're having this event. So thinking about the movement itself, thinking about your personal experiences, I get the distinct impression that you didn't feel invited into this space. You did not feel welcome. What has that challenge been like for you, and what's missing from the climate change movement that you would still like to see? We do not have to keep going in order.
I saw your slide plants on the call.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I exist in a Black femme body. That is just a fact. And we are an inherently our society is not built to support people who look like me, and to support people from where I'm from. So that in and of itself is something that I have to just grapple with every day. And like I said before, it really informs the way that I show up in these spaces. I have to take up space because I have to create my own agency. It's not going to be given to me. And, you know, when I was in high school, I was always interested in, you know, why my community was littered with trash when this place could be so clean, and, you know, how to fix these problems. I thought that this was something that could be easily kind of transformed. We just pick up the trash. But it wasn't until, you know, later in my teens where I understood the power of infrastructure and the power of systemic design, and how inequity is really built into the fabric of our communities. It's built into the fabric of our founding as a nation, and it's one of our most profitable global exports, honestly. So I then went to college, and, you know, still had this passion, but it really transformed into sort of like social justice thinking, and how can I advocate for communities from where I'm from. And it wasn't until law school when I found this niche called fashion law, that opened me up to this idea of sustainability, right? From this perspective of, you know, zero waste, and, you know, the fast fashion industry is polluting the planet and it's so bad. And I'm like, okay, but a lot of Black people wear fast fashion. So I'm not even gonna like trip about this right now, because I think we're missing the point, right? We are focused on the wrong things in these conversations because of how the education has been formed, and by who the education has been shaped by, and who has had access to even be listened to, you know, historically. So I'm looking forward to disrupting that and continuing to change that narrative, as more and more of us, this is a great start, right? As more and more of us start to take up space, and to also create agency, because this is a collective, all hands on deck situation. And we cannot afford to blindly omit the valuable contributions from people who really could support all of us getting out of this mess that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to Vanessa earlier about how last year I was part of this summit that the New York Times put on, and I had a big, I mean, I had many cringe moments, but there was one special cringy moment where they had a panel where it was all three women of color, and it was climate and the emotions. And then they had the next panel, which was two white men talking about climate and economics. And I was like, you know what? I'd rather hear the white millionaire, talk about climate and the emotions, and put one of the brown or Black ladies into the panel about climate and economics, because seriously, it just felt so contrived and so controlled. And the voices were okay here. It's good for you to have an emotional voice, but we don't want you to have a structural voice in terms of dictating the foundation. And so when I was on a different panel the following day with Anaya Butler, who's one of the leaders of Youth versus the Apocalypse, as I was talking, I was saying, you know, access to water. I think Mitch McConnell should learn how to surf, because most often these politicians, their interactions with water is very much on top of yachts and boats and shorelines and harbors and whatnot. And Anaya turned to me, she says, I want to learn how to surf. And I listened, and it stuck with me, and I said, okay, I got you. So you lead poetry sessions mainly focused on climate activism. Okay. And I looked for, it took us a year. It took me a year to put this together, but I found an organization, Me Water Foundation, which teaches mostly brown and black folks from the Bay Area to surf, collects them from different parts of the city, brings them. And so I did a mashup, which was YBA and Me Water Foundation, and we all came together one day, and it was called Stoke of the Word. The Me Water kids taught the poets to surf. The poets taught the surfers how to write. And it was this incredible mashup engagement, giving access to folks who don't know how to swim to be able to participate in the water, surfing. I mean, if you've never surfed, it's fucking awesome. And it's such an exhilarating, and it's so much of it we don't have access to because either proximity, wetsuits, it's expensive. And so again, it's the idea of bringing access and just the platform to be able to express yourself. What did you feel? What did you think? What does the color feel like to you? And so I'll just pass on.
Yeah, when I think about what's been historically overlooked in this movement, I think both of you spoke so well to this idea of access. And I think something that, as a Latina woman, I think about a lot in the climate world is how 80% of our biodiversity is protected by 20% of the world's population, which is indigenous folks, primarily in the Amazon, right? And most of the time I look around and there's no representation of these people in these rooms on the panels that I'm at, or, you know, in the SDG house, right? Like, where are they? They're the ones protecting 80% of our biodiversity. Like, this is just such a missed opportunity. And I think both of you said it in your own ways, whether it's access to the water or access to these spaces. And I think it's not that the solutions aren't out there. There are solutions, right? Like, there's these nonprofits that are doing amazing work. There's this historical wealth of knowledge and wisdom within indigenous communities that people are just ignoring, and we decide, oh no, we can't do anything about climate change. It's like, no, we can. There's solutions, right? It's really an issue of motivation and intention and redistribution of wealth, using our power, our privilege, our access in whatever capacity to support the solutions that exist. So I think it also gives me hope to see and to know that these things are out there, but I think I'm constantly asking, like, how can I help, right? I don't need to recreate the wheel. I did create something to try and help, right? But we don't have to do that. We can just, in our own agency, in our own ways, whether it's as individuals deciding, I'm not going to use a plastic bottle, or through my other work at Support and Feed, we really encourage people to eat a plant-based diet and explore how your plate is connected to the climate crisis. As individuals, there are so many little actions that we can take, but also we're all part of large institutions, right? The Guggenheim, the art world. We all work, just a raise of hands, I guess. How many of you work at a well-funded organization? Awesome. How many of you are innovators or entrepreneurs? Nice, nice. More of those. And artists or activists in your own way. Yeah, all of us, through our own agency, have the power to make change. And I think we don't need to say, we'll solve the problem. We can ask, you know, who can I help and how can I help? And so I think often what's overlooked is, you know, what is already out there. You know, we're busy living our own lives, that we're not really taking the time to question, like, who can I support? Who is already doing this work? And with Hope Hydration and with Support and Feed, we are constantly, you know, in communities, asking, listening, and informing our strategies, where we're putting our stations, or where we're delivering food, or what kind of food we're delivering, is all input from the community. And so I think that taking input from community, realizing our own agency, and using that to create more access is really what's often overlooked.
Beautifully said. It's inspiring and impressive to hear your literacy in your own communities and in the ways that you've learned to create change and to push the boundaries of what's possible. We've also talked quite a bit about some of the challenges, but now I'd like to switch and talk about, I'd love to hear about one inspiring moment that you've had in the work that you've done in your communities. before we turn it to Q&A. So that's a cue for all of you to think about your questions. But what have been the highlights for you in this work?
I'll start. So recently, my father was incarcerated for many years when I was younger, and he has been following my work, for a while. But when you say like I'm doing sustainability to like, folks from, they're just like, what the fuck is that? Like, okay. And it wasn't until I started being in like Vogue and like, all these like publications are like, okay, I kind of get it. But again, storytelling has really been my focus in this space. And so recently my dad called me and he was just like, I really am proud of what you're doing. And I really think that you have changed even he was like, I didn't know what sustainability was before you started doing this. And now I'm thinking about it all the time. And it's really, I can see how it's reframing his perspective on his life and creating more value for him and his experiences and how he can sort of move the needle forward in his own capacity. Another highlight for me was my aunt, who is 78, retired teacher, called me and said, I just want you to know that you are changing the legacy of our family just by speaking up and being yourself. Oh, I'm getting emotional. But it really is like those experiences from people who I come from are really hallmarks of success for me. I can be in any of the publications and win any of the awards and lead a global institution, but nothing comes close to being just recognized and appreciated by my own community.
Sure. So recently at Support and Feed, which was founded by Maggie Baird, who is the mom of Billie Eilish and Phineas, we did a climate summit. And we invited a ton of youth activists aged, 8 years old to maybe 25 to come and speak about what they're working on. And there were no corporates, like I was the oldest person in the room. And just hearing their stories, there was a girl who was 10 years old who developed asthma from air pollution in her neighborhood. And she created an organization that passed legislation to change, the way these factories were operating in her neighborhood. She's like 12 years old, like so young. And I think these realizations that like, it doesn't matter, your qualifications in life, like all of us can create this change, are really moments that inspire me and give me hope to say that, first of all, there's a amazing, badass generation coming right now and a reckoning is coming. And also just like the power that we can have as individuals. And then a second one that we had this week is that for Climate Week, we have a water station in Times Square and they have big screens. And so they're usually sponsored by big brands and, they're talking about their impact and how they're related to sustainability. And this week we stopped all of our sponsorships and we are just promoting nonprofits, advocacy organizations, artists that are all working in climate. And it was just beautiful to be in the middle of like the most capitalistic everyone in there is trying to sell you something, and to have a little space where you can get free water and and do something good, right? And hear about something good. So I think both of those were really proud moments of seeing hope and action.
Well, I think just the day before I came to New York, when we had Stoke of the Word, I think that was one of the most enlivening. I mean, there's this term, social sculpture, invented by Joseph Beuys, German artist, about how art can be used to transcend and transform society. And I think social sculpture for me happened that day, where there was a woman in her 60s that got up on a surfboard. And she also helped a little kid who's 7 years old, who had never been to the beach as well, catch a wave and be in rhythm with the ocean. and having the joy, the laughter, the snot come out of you, and experiencing nature in a way that they don't usually do. And so providing that gift of access and rewarding both the ocean with this laughter, with this exchange that was nonviolent, that was joyous. I think that that was, for me, one of the most captivating. I'm like, this is social sculpture. This is art. You know, this is the manifestation of not just something physical, but really so much about psychological and spiritual. And one of the, to be more personal, I think one of the moments that really touched me was with my husband, where he looked at me and he said, you know, this was magic. And I'm so honored to be a part of it. And when he talks, when I hear him talk to neighbors about, because we live right on Ocean Beach, right on the water, when he talks to his friends that are not, you know, don't know what sustainability means or are not artsy, you know, and he's like, no, 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 let me explain to you. This is sculptural. This happened, and he's, you know, and he starts explaining and educating, and he has nothing to do with art, and he has nothing to do with environmentalism. And I think that the gift of him giving other people what he has learned is what we start giving to each other. Anyone who's willing to listen and pay attention.
Very well said. Thank you so much. I'd like to now open it up for questions from the audience. We have some microphones that we can pass around. Any questions?
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. What do you think is the most important thing in sustainability going on right now that not enough people know about?
Repeat the question for the live streamers. What do you think is the most important issue within sustainability that people don't know about?
So the entry piece that I have, SHH, which is an onomatopoeic term, a lot of, when I found out, this is when my sound alarm went off. There's going to be 7,000 languages that are prognosticated to be extinct by the end of the century. 577 endangered languages are mostly on vulnerable island coastlines around Africa, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. So sea level rise, climate change, climate migration will start creating an extinction of languages. So when we talk about languages, we talk about a culture, we talk about a people. And to me, that was 7,000 languages. You're abolishing, obliterating an entirety of a people with a language. And we don't understand how densely populated these incredibly vulnerable communities are. And that, to me, that we lose a language every 40 days was such an atrocious thing that I was like, I need to start talking about it. I need to start making art about it, which is the video of the SHH and the sea level rising. And so for me, it's like, look at our surroundings, because it's affecting us in a way that we don't see, we don't hear, caras vemos, corazones no sabemos. Like, we see faces, we don't understand hearts, and we don't understand that those hearts come from a culture, a people that is going to be lost really soon.
Any other questions? Sure.
Sure. A question to all three of you, actually. And I come at this from a slightly different perspective, but I can certainly appreciate all of your individual efforts. So I come from the telecommunications mobility space. So we have made great strides in making the world smaller. You can call across the world, you can chat, you can video call, you can do a whole bunch of things trying to bring things together. What I hear is actually a lot of fragmentation into individual communities Is there an effort? Should there be an effort? Should someone like Automate, which is a global platform, pull things together into a more unified approach so that it can affect the broader set of people connected, not necessarily the individual communities that you're so successfully talking to? So my question is around unification of all these individual efforts.
I think our technology is only as good as we are. It's a reflection of us. Until we know how to unify and the value of unification, our technology will just continue to serve silos, right? So I think, I would ask you that question, in your industry. How are you championing the connection and the connectivity of different communities that really need to cross borders, right? Different communities that need to interface with each other, not just for optics, but for the success of humanity and nature. I don't really have an answer because I'm still in the thick of why we are so disunified. And also on the receiving end of the impacts of disunification and often exhausted by it. But I can, use Zoom all I want, it definitely helps to connect with new people. But really, it's about how we are doing that in our own lives and how we are using technology to support that coming together.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I wish I had the solution. I think often, at least in my world, usually the nonprofit world or, sustainable tech solutions, there's a lot of kind of competition, right, for what feels like one bucket of funding or one spot on a panel. And I think it's a huge disservice to our efforts to not be working together and if in a unified force. But I do think that there may be more systemic questions that we need to ask. It's like, why are we feeling like we need to compete with each other? It's because there's not a huge redistribution of wealth supporting these efforts. These efforts want to glorify one solution, one silver bullet, or one amazing nonprofit that has an amazing celebrity behind it, right? So I think you're right. I think we do potentially need to unify, not because there should be one homogeneous solution, but because we can all work together, contributing from the places that we can, from our own lived community experiences. But I do think that companies like yours, like Automattic, have a role to play in bringing these communities together and saying there is space for all of you, and this is what we're doing. Not just saying it, but this is what we're doing to create the space. And I think this panel is a perfect example of a company that is creating that space and is trying to unify and bring together diverse backgrounds. Not a plug, that actually just came out. They didn't pay me to say that. But yeah, I think that there's a systemic question there as well.
I mean, I would just echo what they both said.
Just one more question.
Hi, thanks so much for this. It's very interesting. I was listening, talking about access and access into action. And actually, I believe like art is so powerful, like evoking an emotion. And I only heard once at the beginning of the talk to talk about equity. And I know equity may involve some access, but it goes further. So when I think about underserved populations, they're the ones that have least information about art, about sustainability, but they're the ones that are like more polluted and more affected by all the things that we do. So how can we bring the art and the emotion that actually can evoke actually an action into those people? Because just with the information we live over there for them to read, it's not gonna be enough. And they're the ones that actually, they have like a big chunk of all the things that we could do to have like an impact in the world. So how do you see that?
I mean, in San Francisco, I do a lot of that. I have to bring myself, my energy, my own access to resources. So I do a lot of cross-pollinating where, like I said, I know of someone who knows someone, and then I bring them together to bring them that experience, or I myself go somewhere to create an experience for an underserved. There's so many places that I know of in the Bay Area that don't have access to the arts, that don't have access to that expressive medium that's not right and wrong. But that's not even necessarily having to do with, I went to school and I didn't have access to the arts. And that was just because of the cultural, societal structure. And I think that we can only do so much. There needs to be like a foundational ripping and redistributing of, creating that equity and that access from the ground up on a massive scale. Like there's no Ministry of Culture in the US. So, arts, like I said, my husband's kid draws, and that's what he thinks of art, However, arts really is, like you said, what moves people and brings them there. It creates a shortening in that disparity sometimes by creating something that's an engagement, that it's a somatic feeling that might lead someone to want it more and want to do it again and try so hard that they will make it for themselves so they can create their own access to it. But if you don't try it, you don't know it.
Sustainability issue. I think the misconception is that people from underserved communities maybe need access to certain things to be aware of the arts, but really they are the most artistic people on the planet. The most prolific artists come from need. They come from as we say, the mud, So how can we have this conversation about redistributing resources to support these artists? Because they're already there. They just need the space and the agency and the funding, the sustained funding to be able to create art. And I really do think that's how we change the future. I really, it's like, it really is that simple. How can you invest in the arts in a way that is sustainable and not just philanthropic, or this is a private sector and a public sector issue, and it is hindering our collective sustainability. So yeah, equity, but also sustainability.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for being here and for participating in this panel. And thank you as well to our guests here and on the live stream for joining us.